So now we are going to cover installing joists. Now most of the work in installing joists is pretty much similar to installing the bearers. We need to make sure we know whether they're continuously single span, any holes that we may want to drill through a joist have to comply with the same regulations. Anytime we have to join a joist over a bearer, such as over here, we need to make sure that we have enough bearing on either side of the joist. And if we were to use a different type of join, let's say we were going to have a join that looked something like this, you would find this join would actually not be legal because this side of the joist is actually not sitting supported by this bearer. We would have to at least have enough timber sitting supported by the bearer to be a legal join. So now you can see both timbers are supported adequately. The other thing to make sure of is that all of our joists are nice and straight and in line with each other, that the ends are cut off in line. So that may be achieved by using a straight edge across the joists and either packing or checking out wherever needed to either raise or lower any joist that may be of an inconsistent size. You could pull a string line across there. You could even set up a laser level and shoot a line straight across and make sure that they are all in line so that you don't end up with any bumps or lumps in the flooring. Our nominal fixings, which means how our joists are nailed or connected into the bearers, have to comply with the same regulations that the bearers have to comply with. And of course that is in table 9.4. Let's have a look at the trimming and the blocking. Now this trimming around here we're not going to discuss in this video because the next one will deal with that specifically. Let's have a look at this blocking or this strutting through the middle here. So this, if you remember from a previous video, is to do with deep joist. Now there is a legal term as to what deep joist means. So if we have a look at these, I have drawn these joists as being 35 mm thick and 140 high. Now that gives it a height to thickness ratio of 4:1. The height is 4 times the thickness. Anything that is 4 or more times the thickness in height is called a deep joist. And as soon as you have deep joists, you have to have blocking or strutting to prevent these from rolling over. Anything that's very tall and narrow tends to want to fall over or roll over. And that's the purpose of these. So there's a regulation. If you go to figure 4.5 in the 1684, you will see that to start with, you need a block at either end and then blocking through the middle at no more than 1800 millimeters apart. Now these blocks are a slightly different color. There's a reason which I'll cover that in a moment. So what about this row of blocking through here? Well, there's only certain situations where you need to have this blocking through the middle. The first is that these joists need to be unseasoned. Also, if they are more than a 3 meter span and also have no ceiling attached underneath. So if there are a second story joist with a ceiling or ceiling battening attached to the bottom, then you don't need that central row. And that's the 3 things you need. They need to be unseasoned, over 3 meter span, with no ceiling underneath. And if those 3 parameters exist, then you need this row through here at no further apart than 1800 mm. And that information is all in that figure 4.5 in the 1684. So I suggest you have a really good read through that clause. But from experience, I would say that any time I've got deep joists, I have always blocked these ends and I've always put the blocking through the middle here. It just seems to help stiffen things up. Maybe it's a bit overkill, but it's cheap insurance. An hour's worth of effort and the offcuts of joists that you've got lying around, it's not hard just to throw them through. and make sure that you've got a nice, good, solid job. So let's talk about this blocking in here. Now I mentioned that these blocks coming through cannot be any further than 1800 apart. But these blocks I've got just a slightly different color because these are also serving another purpose, and I'm going to go around this side and talk about these ones first. So all of these blocks are helping the blocking or strutting of deep joists, but these ones that are slightly darker, they're also doing another job. They're blocking for another purpose, and that is support beside openings. Now you'll notice a difference between these blocks. If you look very carefully, you'll see this one here is full height. This one here is not quite full height. That's because blocking for deep joists, they don't need to be full height. They're actually allowed to be slightly shorter, and I encourage you to look in the 1684 and research exactly how much smaller these are allowed to be. These ones here are also blocking for deep joists, but they're full height because the other purpose is supporting the openings beside the wall frame. So you can see these wall frames are coming down, and the side of that opening lands in between joists. So anyone who's done any wall framing knows there's a couple of studs right beside that opening that are taking the weight of a lintel. So there's a fair bit of roof load that comes down here as a point load or a concentrated load. And that term point load or concentrated load means it's not spread out. So all of the studs through this wall, all this roof load is spread out evenly across this wall, but all the weight that would normally come down in here in this opening that's missing has all been transferred down into either side of the wall frame. So right at that point, there's a point load coming down in between, and we cannot rely on just the floor sheeting to hold it up. We need it supported by a piece of solid blocking. So these two blocks are supporting the sides of that doorway. These two blocks are supporting the sides of this opening, so that jamb and secondary jamb stud that continue down through there lands right there, and this one lands right there. And that's why we've got these blocks in specified locations. And if I shoot around to the other side of the house, and that's why these two blocks are close together, because they line up with the sides of this opening. If I were to just draw a little dotted line there, you can see where those come down into that location. So let's talk about loads on the floor joist. Now, generally speaking, the only load that a floor joist is taking is floor load. However, these ones on the ends, on the outside, they are actually taking a bit of roof load as well. And there is quite a lot of regulation in the 1684 regarding joists taking roof load. So if you look in the 1684 under clause number 4.3.2.3 and the very next clause 4.3.2.4, there's a bit of regulation, but I'm going to basically summarize. 90% of the time, a double joist is more than enough. But I encourage you to read through those clauses carefully so you can get a really good knowledge of what's required. But like I say, most of the time, double joist is more than you need to support the associated roof load. Now there's another reason for having a double joist. So if I put the wall frames in, you will see in a spot like this, there's enough joist poking out on the inside of the wall for the flooring to attach to all around the edge, which is important for a cut-in floor. It's not so important for a platform floor, but I still always construct my end joists in this fashion. Even if I'm doing a platform floor and I don't technically need it, I still like to do it anyway because it just gives me a little bit of confidence that I've got a little bit of joist on the inside of that wall frame. Maybe if I'm nailing a tongue and groove floor over the top of my platform floor, which is the situation that I've got over here. If I turn my platform floor on and I sneak my view in here, I've now laid some tongue and groove floor over the top, and I know that I can at least get around the edge of that floor, and I know that I'm nailing into something. Now the last thing that I want to mention is about the spacings. You'll notice that my trimming joists do not line up with the centers of my normal joists. That's because they are both measured to different requirements. These trimming joists and this trimmer are measured to suit the location of the opening in that floor. The spacing of these main joists are spaced to suit the flooring that's going on, and those two spacings will most likely not line up with each other. So your main joists have to go at their regular spacings, usually either 450 or 600, regardless of whether they line up with the edge of any openings. So usually these trimming joists and these trimmers, usually they go in first, and then I install my other main joists around afterwards and just cut them into the locations where they go. The other spacing to be aware of is this very first one. Now let's, for the sake of example, that I've got 24 by 12 plywood sheets going in for my floor. That means my joists have to be in at 600 centers. That means from center of joist to center of joist is my 600 spacings, or 450 if that's what you're doing. However, this first spacing is a little bit different. I have got 600 from the outside of the first joist to the center of that next joist. And that's because our flooring sheets need to finish right on the outside edge of that joist. So our first spacing is from outside edge of our very end joist to the middle of that one. And then from then on, we've got spacings which would be, in this situation, 600 to the first one, 1200 to the next, and so on. All spaced from center of joist to center of joist. So just be aware of that first joist spacing on the end of your floor. And of course that means you have to just start from one end and work your way across, which means the last spacing on the end may be something different. And if I have a look at this last spacing here, you can see that it is not exactly 600 because it's just whatever remains on the end. But you would start from one end, work your way across. You can see here, this is the spacing here from 600 there to 600 there, and it continues across until we've got our last spacing on the end is just whatever is left. So there's a bit of information about installing floor joists. I hope you find that helpful. Thank you and good luck.